Toke rescues woman from the abyss. The next day, his castle was taken over by Carriages. Michael Thompson was returning from a hike in the mountains when he heard desperate screams echoing through the valley. His ranch in the countryside of Vermont was in a mountainous region where accidents on the trails were common, but something in those screams touched him deeply. Running toward the sound, Michael reached the edge of a cliff where he found a woman hanging onto a root, her clothes torn and her face marked by despair. Without hesitation, he climbed down the slippery rocks and pulled her up with all his strength. The woman was conscious, but she was shaking so much she could barely speak. "It's okay. You're safe now," said Michael, carrying her in his arms. They will arrive tomorrow," she murmured, delirious. "The promises? The agreement." Michael didn't understand what she meant, but he took her to the main house on the ranch. It was an imposing 19th-century building, an inheritance from his great-grandfather, a coffee baron who had built a rural empire in the region. The property was known to everyone as Thompson Valley Ranch, and Michael was the last of the male Thompson lineage. Dr. Sarah, the doctor from the neighboring town, was called to examine the woman. She was hurt, but nothing serious, just scratches and a big scare. What drew the most attention was her emotional state. She seemed to be running from something. "She's in shock," explained Dr. Sarah. "She needs rest and care. Don't force her to talk now." Michael prepared the most comfortable guest room and asked Mrs. Wilson, his housekeeper of many years, to care for the woman. It was strange to have a stranger in the house, as he had lived alone since his parents' separation over 20 years ago. During the night, Michael couldn't sleep. There was something familiar about that woman, but he couldn't identify what. She appeared to be about 40 years old, with blonde hair already showing some grey strands, and a gaze that seemed to carry much pain. At dawn the next day, Michael was awakened by a deafening noise coming from the ranch gate. It was the sound of car engines, buses, and even some horse-drawn wagons. From his bedroom window, he saw a veritable invasion of vehicles parking on his property. Wearing only pants and a shirt, Michael ran outside the house. Dozens of people were getting out of the vehicles, carrying suitcases, bags, and various belongings. They were entire families, from small children to elderly people leaning on canes. "What is happening here?" shouted Michael, approaching the first car. A middle-aged man wearing a simple but well-kept suit approached him, holding a yellowed envelope. "Mr. Michael Thompson? We are the Wilson family. We've come to fulfill the agreement made by your father 20 years ago. This letter has the ranch's seal and the signature of Richard Thompson." Michael took the letter with trembling hands. The paper was yellowed with age, but the handwriting was unmistakably his father's. He read it as more families approached, all with similar letters. "When my lost daughter returns to the valley where she was born, all the families harmed by the old conflicts will have the right to shelter at Thompson Valley Ranch, according to the reparations agreement established on this date. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out, now continuing." "But I don't have a sister," said Michael, confused. "My father never mentioned a daughter." "Yes, you do, sir," replied an elderly lady who was getting off one of the buses with difficulty. "Catherine Thompson, your younger sister. She left with your mother when you were children." Michael felt the world spin. He had vague memories of a girl who used to play with him when he was little, but his parents had always said it was just a distant cousin who had visited the ranch. At that moment, the woman he had rescued appeared on the porch of the home, leaning on Mrs. Wilson. Seeing the people gathered in the yard, she paled and tried to go back inside. "No, please, don't let them see me," she said, trembling. The elderly lady, who had mentioned Catherine, stared intently at the woman on the porch. Her eyes filled with tears, and she walked slowly toward the home. "Catherine, my dear Catherine," she called out. The woman on the porch began to sob uncontrollably and collapsed into Mrs. Wilson's arms. "Grandma Betty, how did you find me?" Michael stood frozen. The woman he had rescued was his sister, the sister he didn't even know existed, and now dozens of people were on his property claiming they had a right to some kind of historical reparation. Mrs. Betty slowly climbed the porch steps, carrying a small leather suitcase. From it, she took out an old yellowed photograph. This photo was taken 30 years ago, when you were 10 and your brother Michael was 12. You were playing in the garden of this very home. Michael approached and saw the photograph. It was him as a child, playing with a blonde girl with curly hair. The memories began to return like fragments of a distant dream. "Catherine, I remember you," he said, his voice choked. "You loved playing hide-and-seek in the barn." "And you always found me first because you knew all the hiding spots," she replied, trying to smile through her tears. The siblings' reunion was being watched by all the families gathered in the yard. Michael realized he needed to understand the whole situation better before it got out of hand. "Everyone, come inside to the main room," he said. "Let's talk calmly about this agreement." The main room of the large house was spacious, with old rosewood furniture and family portraits on the walls. Gradually, people settled onto the sofas, chairs, and even the floor. Michael counted about 40 people, including adults, elderly, and children. Mrs. Betty remained by Catherine's side, holding her hand as if afraid of losing her again. "Mr. Michael," a younger man began, "my name is Robert Wilson. I'm a lawyer, and I represent some of these families. The agreement made by your father is legitimate and is registered with the county clerk." "What kind of agreement?" asked Michael. "Your father harmed our families 20 years ago when he evicted all of us from the lands we leased here on the ranch. It was right after your parents' separation. He was angry and made decisions that affected many people's lives." Catherine took a deep breath and stood up. "I need to explain everything from the beginning," she said. "Michael, our parents separated when you were 12 and I was 10. Dad kept you and I went with Mom to New York." "Why don't I remember this clearly?" asked Michael. "Because Dad made you forget. He made you believe I was just a cousin who had visited the ranch. He was suffering so much from the separation that he wanted to forget everything that reminded him of Mom, including me." Mrs. Betty nodded in confirmation. "Your father was a good man, but too proud. When your mother decided to leave, he couldn't accept it and tried to stop her. The fight was terrible. We all lived here on the ranch. We worked the land. Our families had depended on it for generations." "And then?" asked Michael. "Then Richard decided that everyone who had supported your mother during the separation should leave the ranch. About 15 families were evicted overnight. We lost our homes, our jobs, our entire lives," explained Robert. Michael felt like he was getting to know a father completely different from the man who had raised him. But he wrote these letters promising to make amends when Catherine returned. "Why?" "Because he regretted it," said a middle-aged woman. "My name is Jennifer, and I worked in the main house when it all happened. Your father started drinking heavily after the separation. One day, almost 2 years later, he was completely drunk and crying, asking for forgiveness. That's when he wrote these letters and gave them to some people in town, saying that one day, when his daughter returned, he would make peace with everyone." "But Catherine never came back," observed Michael. "Not for lack of wanting," said Catherine, drying her tears. "Mom strictly forbade me from having any contact with you. She said Dad was a violent and dangerous man, that he could hurt us if he found out where we were." "That's not true," protested Michael. "Dad was never violent." "I know that now," said Catherine. "But at the time I was just a child, and I believed everything Mom told me. I grew up afraid of my own father and my own brother." The tension in the room was palpable. Michael tried to process all that information while observing the families around him. There were small children sleeping in their parents' laps, elderly people tired from the journey, anxious young people. Everyone was waiting for an answer from him. "And how did you know that Catherine had returned?" asked Michael. "We didn't know," replied Robert. "We've been watching the ranch for years, waiting for a sign. Last night, Tyrone, who works at the gas station on the highway, called us saying he had seen you carrying an injured woman into the house. His description matched the photo Mrs. Betty had of Catherine." Michael looked at Tyrone, a black man about 60 years old, who was sitting in a corner of the room. "Your father helped me a lot when I was young," said Tyrone. "Even after the families were kicked out, he gave me a job at the station, but he always said that one day he would make things right. When I saw that young lady, I was sure it was her." "How could you be sure?" asked Michael. "The eyes," Tyrone replied simply. She has the same eyes as your father when he was angry, and the same eyes as you when you're worried." Catherine stood up again, now more firmly. "Michael, I need to tell you why I was running away when I fell down that ravine." Everyone in the room fell silent, waiting. "After Mum passed away 5 years ago, I discovered many things. She had married again to a man named Edward Miller. He seemed like a good person at first, but after Mum was gone, he showed his true face. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out." Now continuing. "What kind of true face?" asked Michael, already fearing the answer. "Edward found out about the inheritance I was entitled to here at the ranch. He spent years manipulating me, saying I was incapable of making my own decisions, that I needed him for everything. He kept me practically locked up at home, controlling every aspect of my life." Mrs. Betty squeezed Catherine's hand tightly. "Go on, my dear." "3 months ago, Edward arranged a marriage for me with one of his business partners, a much older man who wanted a young wife to take care of him. When I refused, Edward threatened to have me committed to a psychiatric clinic, claiming I had mental problems." Michael felt a growing anger inside him. "And so you ran away?" "I tried, but I got lost on the road and ended up off the main path. I'd been walking for 2 days without eating properly when I slipped on the trail and fell. If you hadn't found me—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Michael stood up and walked to the window. The property was indeed taken over by cars and people. Outside he could see families setting up small makeshift camps, children playing in the yard, elderly people chatting in the shade of the trees. "Robert," Michael called out, "you said this agreement is registered with the county clerk. What kind of compensation exactly did my father promise?" "Permanent shelter for the families, the right to return to work on the lands, and a symbolic compensation for the lost years. Nothing you can't fulfill considering the size of this property." Michael did a quick calculation. The Thompson Valley Ranch was over 1,000 hectares, including the main house, 3 smaller houses, barns, stables, and vast farmland. Theoretically, there was space for everyone, but the issue wasn't just about physical space. "And if I don't agree to the deal?" asked Michael. "Then we will go to court," replied Robert, keeping a respectful but firm tone. "The document is valid, and your father was in full possession of his mental faculties when he signed it." Catherine approached Michael. "Brother, I didn't come here to cause trouble. If my presence is bringing all these complications, I can leave." "No." Michael turned quickly. "You are my sister. I just found you. I won't let you leave. The problem isn't you, it's this whole situation." Mrs. Betty stood up with difficulty, leaning on her cane. "Michael, can I speak with you in private?" Michael nodded, and the two went out to the porch. The sun was high and the activity in the yard had slowed down, with people resting in the shade. "Your father was my son-in-law," said Mrs. Betty. "He married my daughter Margaret, the mother of you both. I saw that man's heart break when Margaret decided to leave." "Why did she leave?" asked Michael. "Because Richard was changing. The success of the ranch had gone to his head. He was becoming authoritarian, controlling. Margaret tried to talk to him several times, but he wouldn't listen. She felt suffocated." Michael had never heard this version of the story. "And why did she take Catherine and leave me here?" "Because you were the male heir. In Richard's mind, you were the future of the ranch. Catherine was just a girl. He didn't give her the same importance. Margaret knew that if she tried to take you too, Richard would move heaven and earth to get you back. So she made an impossible choice between her children." Michael felt a lump in his throat. "And these families, were they really harmed by Dad?" "They were. Richard was so upset that he punished anyone who had shown solidarity with Margaret. They were difficult years for many people. But your father wasn't a bad man, Michael. He was suffering and made wrong decisions." Michael looked at all those people in his yard, entire families who had lived through years of hardship because of decisions made by his father in a moment of pain. "What do you think I should do?" "Honor your father's agreement," said Mrs. Betty. "He was trying to correct the mistakes of the past. Don't let the Thompson pride cause more suffering." Michael returned to the room where everyone awaited his decision. "I will honor my father's agreement," he announced. But we need to organize this in a practical way. We can't have 40 people living in the main house. A murmur of relief and joy spread through the room. The smaller houses on the property will be renovated to accommodate the families. Anyone who wants to work on the ranch will be welcome, but we'll do this in an organized and gradual way, Michael continued. Robert approached and extended his hand. Thank you, Mr. Michael. I know it's not an easy decision. It isn't, Michael agreed, but it's the right decision. In the following days, the Thompson Valley Ranch turned into a real construction site. Michael hired local masons and carpenters to renovate the smaller homes, while the families organized themselves into groups to help with the work. Catherine remained in the main house, recovering from the trauma and getting to know the brother she had lost. During long nightly conversations, they pieced together the family's history and began to heal the wounds of the past. Michael, I have something to show you, said Catherine 1 week after her arrival. She went to her room and returned with a small suitcase she had brought in her escape. Inside this suitcase are all the letters Mom wrote to Dad over the years, but never sent, and also the letters Dad wrote to her and never sent. Michael opened the suitcase and found dozens of yellowed letters. Some were in his mother's handwriting, others in his father's. How did you get Dad's letters? Edward. He had hired a private investigator to find out information about the inheritance. The investigator got these letters from someone who worked here at the ranch. Edward used them to emotionally blackmail me. Michael began to read one of his father's letters. Margaret, my love, today marks 3 years since you left. I made terrible mistakes and know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I evicted innocent families from the ranch just because they supported your decision. My wounded pride led me to make decisions that caused suffering for many people. Catherine must be a young lady now. Michael asks about her sometimes, but I don't know what to say. I made up that she was just a distant cousin. How can I explain to a boy that his own father destroyed the family? Michael had to stop reading. Tears blurred his vision. He suffered a lot, Michael, said Catherine. Mum did too. She wrote letters asking to come back, but never had the courage to send them. Why? Because Edward intercepted all the letters. He wanted Mom to marry him and knew that if she went back to Dad, he would lose his chance. He manipulated Mom for years, just like he did with me later. Michael felt a tremendous anger toward this man who had manipulated his family for so long. Where is this Edward now? Probably looking for me. He must have found out I'm here. As if fate were orchestrating events, at that moment Mrs. Wilson came to inform them that there was a man at the gate asking to speak with Michael. He says his name is Edward Miller and that he's come to get his wife, said Mrs. Wilson. Catherine turned pale. He's come to get me. No one is taking you from here, said Michael, determined. You are my sister and you are under my protection. Michael went out to meet Edward at the ranch gate. He was a tall man, about 50 years old, well-dressed and with an authoritative air. He was accompanied by 2 younger men, probably his henchmen. Mr. Michael Thompson, said Edward, extending his hand. I am Edward Miller, Catherine's stepfather. I've come to collect my stepdaughter who ran away from home. Michael did not accept the handshake. Catherine is not your stepdaughter. She is my sister and a free adult woman entitled to make her own decisions. Catherine has serious psychological problems, said Edward, pulling papers from his pocket. I have medical documents here that prove she needs specialized care. As her legal guardian, I have the right to take her for treatment. Michael examined the papers. They looked official, but there was something odd about them. These documents are not valid here. Catherine is under the care of Dr. Sarah, who is a physician registered with the Vermont Medical Board. Look, son, said Edward, changing his tone to a more threatening one, we don't want any trouble. Just hand over the woman and we can all be at peace. At that moment, Robert Wilson approached. He had been watching the argument from the house window and decided to intervene. Excuse me, said Robert. I'm Catherine Thompson's lawyer. If you have any legal matters to discuss, you'll need to do so through the proper legal channels. And who are you to get involved in this? Asked Edward. Robert Wilson, Bar Association number 34567 from Vermont. I represent the Thompson family's interests in this property. Michael was surprised. He didn't know Robert had become Catherine's lawyer. "Catherine came to me yesterday and told me the whole situation," Robert explained discreetly to Michael. "I offered my services pro bono. These documents he's showing are fake." Edward started to get nervous. "You don't know who you're dealing with. I have influence in various instances. I can make your lives very complicated." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. "Then do it," said Michael. "But do it through the legal system. Catherine stays here until a court rules otherwise." Edward realized he wouldn't be able to take Catherine by force, especially with dozens of people watching from the window of the home. "This isn't over," he said, getting back into his car. "You'll regret crossing me." After Edward left, Michael went back into the home where he found Catherine in a panic. "He's going to find a way to take me by force," she said. "Edward has connections. He knows influential people." "Don't worry," said Robert. "I'm going to investigate these documents he brought. I have contacts in the district attorney's office who can help." During the following days, life at the ranch continued at its rebuilding pace, but everyone was apprehensive about Edward's possible return. The families organized themselves to take shifts, keeping watch, and Michael hired a security guard to be on duty at the gate. Jennifer, the woman who had worked in the main house during the separation of Michael's parents, sought out Catherine for a private conversation. "Dear, I kept some things from when you were a child. I thought you might like to see them." Jennifer took Catherine to one of the smaller houses where she had set up a small museum with items from the time when the family was still united. There were photos, toys, little clothes, and even some drawings that Catherine had made as a child. "Your father kept all of this," said Jennifer. "Even after the separation, he never had the heart to throw it away. When he passed, I took everything to keep, hoping that one day you would come back." Catherine picked up a colorful drawing where she had depicted the family, the father, the mother, her, and Michael, all holding hands in front of the main house. "I remember when I made this drawing," she said. "It was my 8th birthday. Daddy said we were always going to be a happy family." "Your father kept this drawing in his desk drawer until the day he left us," said Jennifer. "Michael doesn't even know about it." Catherine decided to show the drawing to Michael that night. When he saw the depiction of the happy family, he couldn't control his emotion. "Catherine, I'm so sorry for all those lost years. If I had known. You were a child, Michael. There was no way for you to know. What's important now is that we make the most of the time we have." The following week, Robert brought news about the investigation into Edward's documents. "As I suspected, the medical reports are forged. I found the doctor who supposedly signed the documents. He confirmed he never examined Catherine, and that his signature was forged." "And now?" asked Michael. "Now we're going to sue Edward for document forgery and attempted unlawful imprisonment. I've already filed a complaint with the state police." "Can he be arrested?" asked Catherine. "If convicted, he could get 2 to 6 years in prison. But the most important thing is that you are legally free from him." At that moment, Mrs. Betty approached the group. "There's something you all need to know," she said. "This morning, Mrs. Jenkins, who lives in town, came to me with some important information." "What information?" asked Michael. "Edward was in town offering money to people to give false testimony against Catherine. He's trying to build a case to prove that she is mentally unstable." "Did anyone accept?" asked Robert. "From what Mrs. Jenkins said, a few people were tempted, but most refused. The problem is he only needs to find 2 or 3 people willing to lie to create trouble." Michael felt they needed to speed things up. "Robert, how long does it take to file the lawsuit against Edward?" "Normally a few months, but I can try to speed it up through injunctive measures. The problem is he could also file a lawsuit against us, claiming we are keeping Catherine against her will." Catherine stood up, determined. "Then let's get ahead of it. I want to give an interview to the local newspaper telling the whole truth. I want everyone to know what Edward did to me and to my mother." "Are you sure?" asked Michael. "Once it's in the newspaper, there's no going back." "I'm sure. I'm tired of running and hiding. It's time to face the situation head on." The next day, Catherine gave a detailed interview to the reporter from the regional newspaper. She talked about the years of manipulation, the intercepted letters, the forced marriage, and the escape that brought her back home. The story was published in the Sunday edition and caused a major impact in the region. Edward tried to deny everything through his lawyer, but the evidence against him was very strong. A week after the publication, Robert received an unexpected call. "Michael, you need to come to the office right away," Robert said over the phone. Michael and Catherine went into town, where Robert had a small office on Main Street. "Edward's lawyer approached me today," said Robert. "He wants to make a deal." "What kind of deal?" asked Catherine. "Edward gives up any rights over you and promises to never bother you again in exchange for not being prosecuted for the crimes he committed." "No way," Michael said immediately. "He has to pay for what he did." "Calm down, Michael," said Catherine. "Let Robert explain better." The lawyer said Edward is in serious financial trouble. It seems he invested all of his mother's inheritance money in businesses that went wrong. He's practically bankrupt and desperate. "And so we should feel sorry for him?" asked Michael. "It's not a question of pity," Robert explained. "It's a practical matter. If we accept the deal, Catherine is free of him immediately and forever. If we go to trial, it could take years, and he could keep bothering you the entire time." Catherine became thoughtful. "I just want peace, Michael. If he signs a document promising to never contact me again, I'll be satisfied." "But he needs to return what he stole from our mother's inheritance," said Michael. Robert smiled. "That's already included in the deal. He will transfer to Catherine everything that remains of Margaret's assets." "How much is left?" asked Catherine. "A small apartment in New York and a sum of money. It's not much, but it's something." Catherine decided to accept the deal. A week later, they met at the notary's office to sign the documents. Edward was visibly dejected and didn't have the courage to look Catherine in the eye. "Catherine," he said before leaving, "I really thought I was taking care of you." "No, Edward," she replied. "You were controlling my life for your own benefit." "There's a very big difference between taking care and controlling." Edward signed the papers and left the notary's office without saying another word. Catherine was finally free. With the Augusto matter resolved, life at the Thompson Valley Ranch began to find a new rhythm. The families had settled into the renovated homes, and many were working on the property. Michael discovered that having so many people on the ranch was actually very good for business. Tyrone, who worked at the gas station, revealed he had mechanical knowledge and became responsible for maintaining all the ranch's vehicles. Mrs. Betty, despite her advanced age, organized a community garden that supplied all the families. Robert, besides being a lawyer, had knowledge of administration and helped Michael better organize the property's finances. Gradually, the Thompson Valley Ranch was transforming into a truly self-sustaining community. One night, 2 months after the family's arrival, Michael and Catherine were on the porch of the main house talking about the future. "Michael, I've been thinking about something," said Catherine. "What?" "All these families came here because they were harmed by our father's decisions, but now they are rebuilding their lives. Wouldn't it be great if we could help other people too?" "How so?" "I thought about turning part of the ranch into a shelter center for women who have gone through situations similar to mine. Women who have suffered domestic violence, psychological manipulation, who need to rebuild their lives." Michael thought the idea was fantastic. "We have plenty of space and skilled people to help. Mrs. Betty could teach horticulture, Jennifer could teach cooking, Robert could provide legal guidance." "Exactly," said Catherine, excited. "It would be a way to turn all the past suffering into something positive for the future." They began to plan the project. Michael would donate a portion of the land to create a non-profit foundation. Catherine would be the general coordinator of the shelter center, using her own experience to help other women. The news of the project spread quickly through the region. Many people offered to help as volunteers. Dr. Sarah agreed to be the physician responsible for the care of the sheltered women. The priest from the neighboring town offered to provide spiritual support. A psychologist from Boston moved to the area specifically to work on the project. 6 months after the arrival of the Carriages, as everyone had started calling that historic day, the New Hope Shelter Center was inaugurating its activities. The first woman to be sheltered was Dorothy, a 60-year-old lady who had suffered domestic violence during 30 years of marriage. She arrived at the ranch with only the clothes on her back and a deep fear in her eyes. "Mrs. Dorothy," said Catherine, greeting her at the gate, "you are safe here. No one will ever hurt you again." Dorothy began to cry. "I don't know how to do anything, dear. I've never worked outside the home. I have no education. I have nowhere to go." "You know how to do many things," said Mrs. Betty, approaching. "I'm sure you know how to cook, take care of a home, take care of other people. That's valuable knowledge, and here you will learn other things too." During the following weeks, Dorothy began to integrate into life on the ranch. She discovered she had a knack for caring for animals and became responsible for the chicken coop. Gradually, she regained her self-esteem and confidence. 1 year after the arrival of the Carriages, the Thompson Valley Ranch had been completely transformed. Where before there was only a solitary family, now there was a vibrant community of over 100 people. Michael, who had lived alone for so many years, discovered the pleasure of being surrounded by family and friends. Catherine, who had spent years being controlled and manipulated, found her vocation helping other women rebuild their lives. On a Sunday afternoon, the entire community gathered for a collective lunch on the main house's patio. There were children running and playing, elderly people chatting in the shade, and young people planning their futures. "Michael," said Catherine, observing all the activity, "do you think Dad imagined that his letters of reparation would result in all this?" "I don't think so," replied Michael. "But I think he would be happy to see that his past mistakes turned into a force for good." Mrs. Betty, now 75 but still very active, approached the siblings. "You two should be proud of what you've built here. This ranch has become an example for the entire region." It was true. The Thompson Valley Ranch project had drawn attention from other towns. Politicians, social workers, journalists, they all came to see the work being done there. "The most important thing," said Catherine, "is that we managed to turn a place that was a symbol of family division into a place of unity and hope." That night, after everyone had gone to sleep, Michael and Catherine walked to the ranch's cemetery, where their parents were buried. "Dad, Mum," said Michael, standing before the graves, "I know you made mistakes, but I also know you always loved us. I hope you rest in peace knowing we found our way back to each other and that we transformed the pain of the past into hope for the future." Catherine placed flowers on both graves. "Thank you for making the agreement that brought us back to each other," she said, "and thank you for all the people this reunion has helped." 2 years later, Thompson Valley Ranch received a very special visit. It was a delegation from the federal government that had come to learn about the project, possibly to replicate it in other regions of the country. Michael and Catherine welcomed the visitors in the main room of the house, the same room where 2 years earlier they had received the families who arrived unexpectedly with their letters of reparation. "You have created a unique model here in the United States," said the delegation's coordinator. "You've managed to combine rural development, social inclusion, support for women victims of violence and economic sustainability into a single project." "Actually," said Catherine, "we just honored the agreement our father had made. All of this was born from the need to repair past mistakes. And today," Michael added, "we have a self-sustaining community here that produces organic food, generates income for dozens of families, and has already helped more than 50 women rebuild their lives." The delegation stayed at the ranch for 3 days, learning about every aspect of the project. At the end of the visit, they proposed making Thompson Valley Ranch a national reference center, with federal support to expand the program. "This means," the coordinator explained, "funding to expand the facilities, hire more professionals, and welcome more families and women." Michael and Catherine looked at each other. It was an incredible opportunity, but also a great responsibility. "We need to talk with the whole community before making a decision," said Michael. At the community meeting held that night, the proposal was presented to everyone. There were many questions and discussions. "If the ranch becomes a national reference center," asked Robert, "will we still maintain our autonomy to make decisions?" "According to the proposal," Catherine explained, "yes. We would continue to be an independent organization. We would just receive technical and financial support from the government." Tyrone raised an important concern. "And what if the government changes? Could the project be cancelled? That's a risk, admitted Michael. But on the other hand, with federal support we could help many more people. Mrs. Betty, who was respected by everyone as the community matriarch, asked to speak. My dears, when Richard Thompson wrote those letters of reparation, he was only thinking about fixing his own mistakes. He never imagined it would result in something so big. I think we should accept the proposal. If we can help more people, we should do it. The vote was held, and the proposal was approved unanimously. 6 months later, Thompson Valley Ranch was being expanded with new pavilions, houses, and facilities. The shelter center doubled in size and began receiving women from all over the United States. Catherine became a national reference in providing care for women who are victims of domestic violence, being invited to speak at universities and conferences. Michael was recognized as one of the pioneers in sustainable rural development, but for them, the most important thing wasn't the recognition or the awards. The most important thing was seeing the transformation in the lives of the people who arrived at the ranch. Like Mary, a 25-year-old woman who arrived pregnant and with no prospects, and who 2 years later had graduated as an agricultural technician and was coordinating the production of organic vegetables. Or like Jack, a 10-year-old boy who arrived with his mother, traumatized by the violence he had witnessed at home, and who was now one of the best students at the rural school that had been created on the ranch. Or like Dorothy, the first woman they sheltered, who at 62 years old learned to read and write and became responsible for the digital inclusion program for seniors. On a winter afternoon, 5 years after the day of the Carriages, Michael and Catherine were on the porch of the main home watching the activity on the ranch. There were over 200 people living there, among long-time families, sheltered women, project employees, and volunteers. Catherine, said Michael, have you ever thought about what our lives would be like if you hadn't fallen down that cliff? I think about that sometimes, she replied. I'd probably still be controlled by Edward. You'd still be alone on this ranch, and all these people would still be waiting for an opportunity to rebuild their lives. It's strange to think that the worst moment of your life was actually what brought so much good. It wasn't the worst moment, said Catherine. The worst moment was when I thought I would never find my family again. Falling down the cliff was actually the beginning of all the good things that happened after. At that moment, a child of about 4 came running toward them. It was Peter, the son of one of the sheltered women, who called Michael and Catherine uncle and aunt. Uncle Michael! Aunt Catherine! Shouted the boy. Are you coming to see the ducklings that were born? Michael and Catherine smiled and stood up to follow Peter to the lake, where some ducks had made nests. Look how many, said Peter, counting on his little fingers. 1, 2, 3. So many ducklings. Catherine knelt down to be at the boy's height. Peter, did you know that when ducklings are born, they follow the first thing they see? They think that person is their mother. And do they stay with the mother forever? Asked Peter. They stay until they grow up and become adult ducks. Then they form their own families. Peter became thoughtful. Like us here on the ranch. Is everyone family? Michael smiled. Like us here on the ranch. That night, there was a party to celebrate the 5th anniversary of the arrival of the Carriages. The party was organized in the main courtyard, with music, dancing, and plenty of food. Robert, who had become the ranch's general administrator, gave an emotional speech. 5 years ago, we arrived here as disconnected families, people hurt by the past. Today, we are a united community that is an example for the entire United States. This was only possible because Michael and Catherine had the courage to honor an agreement they didn't even know existed. Mrs. Betty, now 80 years old and still very lucid, also spoke. My children, I have lived long enough to see many changes in this world, but I have rarely seen a transformation as beautiful as the one that happened here. Richard and Margaret would be proud of you. Catherine asked to speak last. When I fell down that cliff 5 years ago, I thought my life was over. In truth, my life was just beginning. I discovered that family isn't just about who shares the same blood. Family is who chooses to be by your side, who supports you in difficult times, who celebrates your victories. All of you are my family. The party went on until late, with people of all ages dancing and having fun together. 10 years after the Carriages arrived, the Thompson Valley Ranch had become an international reference. Delegations from other countries came to learn about the project, and several similar initiatives had been created in different states of the United States. Michael, now 52, had married Dr. Sarah, and they had 2 young children. Catherine, at 50, had found love in Robert, and they had also started a family. The big home, which once housed only a lonely man, was now the home of a large extended family. In the rooms where silence once reigned, there were now children's voices, lively conversations, and lots of life. Mrs. Betty had passed away at 85, but not before seeing the ranch completely transformed. In her will, she left a letter for Michael and Catherine. "My dear children of the heart, you turned pain into healing, separation into union, a dark past into a bright future. Richard and Margaret can finally rest in peace, knowing their children found the way to heal the family's wounds. The ranch that was once a stage for fights and separation is now a symbol of love and rebuilding. Take good care of this legacy and continue to spread hope wherever you go." On a spring morning, 15 years after the day of the Carriages, Michael was teaching his 10-year-old son to ride a horse. They passed by the exact spot where Catherine had fallen on that life-changing day. "Dad," the boy asked, "is it true that Aunt Catherine fell right here?" "It's true," Michael replied. "This is where our family was reunited." "And what if she hadn't fallen?" Michael stopped the horse and looked out at the ranch below. Hundreds of people lived and worked there. Children played in the yards. Women tended the gardens. Men worked in the fields. It was a vision of prosperity and harmony. "If she hadn't fallen," Michael said, "none of this would exist. Sometimes, son, the bad things that happen to us serve to lead us to much better things." "How so?" "If your aunt hadn't suffered with the bad man who controlled her, she would never have learned to help other women going through the same thing. If our grandfather hadn't made mistakes in the past, he would never have written those letters asking for forgiveness. And if those letters didn't exist, all those families would never have come back here." The boy was thoughtful. "So sometimes bad things turn into good things." "Sometimes, yes, when we have the courage to turn suffering into wisdom and wisdom into help for other people." That afternoon, during the Sunday community lunch, Catherine announced news that moved everyone. "Everyone, you know that 15 years ago, when you arrived here, Michael and I were 2 hurt people trying to understand our family's past. Today we are a community of more than 300 people working together to build a better future." Everyone applauded. "Guys, that's why," Catherine continued, "we decided to create the Richard and Margaret Thompson Foundation, an organization that will take our experience to other parts of the United States and the world." Michael stood up to add, "The foundation will operate here at the ranch, but it will also support the creation of similar centers in other regions. We want other separated families to be reunited, other women to find freedom, other communities to discover the power of unity." Robert, now the ranch's administrative director, presented the project's numbers. "In 15 years, we have welcomed more than 500 women and their families. Of these, 420 have managed to completely rebuild their lives. We have a domestic violence recidivism rate of only 3%, well below the national average. But the most important thing," said Catherine, "isn't the numbers. It's knowing that each one of these women became the protagonist of her own life, that she stopped being a victim to become a survivor, and many have become helpers for other women." Jennifer, who now coordinated the vocational training program, talked about the economic results. "The ranch is now completely self-sustaining. We produce our own food, generate solar power, and have our own water treatment station. We even sell the surplus from our organic production to other cities, generating income for all the families." Dorothy, the first woman welcomed here, now 72 years old and coordinator of the program for the elderly, also spoke. "When I arrived here 15 years ago, I was a broken woman with no self-esteem, no prospects. Today I coordinate a program that has already served more than 100 elderly women who are victims of violence. I discovered that age is no barrier to starting life over." Emotion overcame everyone when Tyrone, now 75, stood up. "I want to thank Richard Thompson, even though he is no longer with us. If he hadn't had the courage to recognize his mistakes and write those letters, none of this would have happened. It takes real greatness to admit when you're wrong and try to make things right. That night, Michael and Catherine walked again to the ranch cemetery, as they did every year on the anniversary of the Carriages' arrival. "Dad, Mom," Michael said before the graves, 15 years ago I came here angry with you for destroying our family. Today I come with gratitude, because I understand that you planted the seeds for our family to rebuild itself even stronger." Catherine placed fresh flowers on the graves. "Thank you for giving me such a wonderful brother. Thank you for teaching me, even unintentionally, the value of family and unity. And thank you for having the wisdom to write those letters that brought us back to each other." 20 years after the arrival of the Carriages, Thompson Valley Ranch was being studied in universities around the world as an example of sustainable development and social innovation. The Richard and Margaret Thompson Foundation had supported the creation of 50 similar centers in different countries. Michael, at 57, had been invited to advise the UN on rural development projects. Catherine, at 55, had earned a doctorate in social psychology and was internationally recognized for her work with women who are victims of violence. But for them, the most important achievements were still the small daily victories. Each woman who arrived broken and left empowered, each family that was reunited, each child who grew up in an environment of peace and love. One autumn afternoon, Michael was in his office when he received a letter that moved him deeply. It was from a woman named Emily Davis, who had been welcomed at the ranch 10 years earlier. "Mr. Michael and Mrs. Catherine, today my daughter graduated from medical school. When we arrived at the ranch 10 years ago, she was only 12 years old and traumatized by the violence she had witnessed. Today she is a strong and determined young woman who chose medicine to help other people. She told me she wants to work with women who are victims of violence because she learned at the ranch that it's possible to turn pain into strength to help others. You didn't just save our lives, you taught us that life is worth living. My daughter says you are her heroes, and I agree with her." Michael shared the letter with Catherine, who was equally moved. "Michael, do you remember when we were kids and we dreamed of being heroes?" asked Catherine. "I remember," Michael smiled. "You wanted to save princesses, and I wanted to be a brave knight." "I think we managed to fulfill our dreams," said Catherine. "Just in a different way than we imagined. You became the knight who saves entire families, and I became the person who helps other women free themselves from invisible prisons." "And the best part," said Michael, "is that we did it together, as a real family." That night, as they had every Thursday for 20 years, Michael and Catherine had dinner together on the porch of the main house, talking about the plans for the following week, about the women who would arrive at the center, about the families who were already ready to go their own ways. It was a simple conversation between siblings, but filled with all the meaning of a journey that began with a fall into a precipice and turned into building a new life for hundreds of people. "Catherine," said Michael, watching the activity on the ranch, "do you think we've already fulfilled our mission?" "I think our mission will never be completely fulfilled," she replied. "As long as there are people needing a second chance, as long as there are separated families waiting to be reunited, as long as there are women seeking their freedom, our mission continues." "And are you tired?" "Never," said Catherine with a smile. "Every day here gives me more energy to keep going. Waking up in the morning and seeing all these people building their lives reminds me why it's worth fighting for." Michael agreed. Even with all the responsibilities, with all the challenges, with all the daily rush, he wouldn't trade his life for anything. The loneliness from 20 years ago had been replaced by a rich web of relationships, each one unique and special. 25 years after the Carriages arrived, Thompson Valley Ranch celebrated its silver anniversary with a big party that lasted 3 days. People came from all over the United States and other countries, including many women who had been sheltered there and were now leaders in their own communities. Emily Davis, the woman whose daughter had graduated from medical school, brought the young doctor to see the place that had changed their lives. The young doctor, now 22 years old, announced that she would do a residency in psychiatry and wanted to work specifically with trauma in women and children. "It was here that I learned that it doesn't matter what happened to us in the past," said the young woman. "What matters is what we do with that experience to help other people." During the party, a memorial was inaugurated in honor of all the people who had contributed to building that community. The memorial included the names of Richard and Margaret Thompson, Mrs. Betty, all the women who had been sheltered, and all the volunteers and collaborators. But the most emotional moment was when Catherine and Michael unveiled a special plaque which read, "In memory of all moments of despair that turned into hope, of all falls that became risings, of all separations that turned into reunions. May this place always serve as a reminder that it's possible to turn any sad ending into a new, happy beginning." That night, the last night of the celebration, Michael gave a speech that summed up everyone's feelings. 25 years ago, my sister fell into a ravine while trying to escape a life that wasn't hers. That fall brought her back home, and brought home back to all of us. Today, looking at all of you, at this community, at all the lives that have been transformed, I understand that sometimes we need to fall in order to learn how to fly. Sometimes we need to get lost to find our true path. And sometimes we need to be alone to discover that we were never really alone. Catherine added, "The agreement our father wrote promised shelter for the families when the lost daughter returned. Today I understand that I wasn't the only lost daughter. Every person who arrived here was in some way lost, and every person who left here found not just a new home, but found themselves." The party ended with everyone singing a song that had become the unofficial anthem of the ranch. Home by Johnny Cash. The lyrics spoke about how home isn't just a place, but is where the people we love are. 30 years after the Carriages arrived, Michael was 62 and Catherine was 60. The ranch continued to prosper, and the Richard and Margaret Thompson Foundation had become one of the world's most respected organizations in combating domestic violence and promoting sustainable rural development. But for Michael and Catherine, the greatest achievement was much simpler. They had managed to turn a story of family separation into a story of union, a story of pain into a story of healing, a story of a sad ending into a story of happy new beginnings. On a quiet afternoon, the two siblings were sitting on the same porch where they had reunited 30 years earlier. The ranch was celebrating because one of the sheltered women, a 25-year-old, had just graduated from law school and opened an office in town to provide free legal services to female victims of violence. "Catherine," said Michael, "if on that day, when you fell into the ravine, someone had told you everything that was going to happen over the next 30 years, would you have believed it?" "Never," laughed Catherine. "I was so lost, so broken, that I couldn't even imagine a near future, let alone all of this." "And today, looking back, would you change anything?" Catherine thought for a moment. "You know, Michael, for many years I was angry about all the bad things that happened to me. Our parents' separation, Edward's manipulation, the years I spent away from you. But today I understand that every pain I went through prepared me to help other people who went through the same pains. If I hadn't suffered, I wouldn't be able to truly understand the suffering of others." Michael agreed. "It's like that phrase written on the memorial. It doesn't matter how many times you fall. What matters is how many times you get up and help others get up too." At that moment, a girl of about 8 came running towards them. It was Sophia, the daughter of one of the sheltered women who had become the darling of the entire ranch because of her contagious energy and joy. "Uncle Michael, Aunt Catherine," shouted Sophia. "My mum said you two were siblings who got lost and found each other. Is it true?" "It's true," said Catherine, lifting Sophia onto her lap. "And were you sad when you were lost?" "Very sad," replied Michael. "But are you happy now?" "Very happy," they answered in unison. Sophia thought for a moment, as only children can. "So, when people get lost, can they find each other again?" "Yes, they can," said Catherine. "And sometimes when they meet again, they discover they're even more family than they were before." Sophia ran off to play with the other children, leaving Michael and Catherine reflecting on the simple wisdom of the girl's words. "You know, Catherine," said Michael, "I think that's the real lesson of our whole story. It's not about never getting lost. It's about always believing it's possible to find each other again. And about discovering that sometimes, when we find each other, we find much more than we were looking for," Catherine completed. The sun was setting over the Thompson Valley Ranch, painting the sky with golden hues that reflected on the water of the lake where the ducks swam peacefully. It was the end of another day on a property that had transformed from a symbol of division into a symbol of unity, from a place of loneliness into a place of community, from a setting of separation into a stage for countless reunions. Michael and Catherine remained on the porch until dark, talking about the plans for the next day, about the women who would arrive next week, about the Institute's projects for the next year. But mostly, they were enjoying the simple and extraordinary privilege of being siblings who had found each other again and who had turned their reunion into a force to bring thousands of other people together. When they finally got up to go inside, Catherine took one last look at the cliff where she had fallen 30 years before. "Thank you," she said softly, not to Michael but to life, to fate, to all the forces that had conspired to turn that fall into flight. Michael heard her and smiled. He was grateful too, grateful for the sister he had found again, for the family he had rebuilt, for the community they had created together, and for all the lessons they had learned about how to turn sad endings into new beginnings full of hope. End of story. Now tell us what you thought of this story of overcoming and family reunion. Do you believe it's possible to turn the pains of the past into strength to help other people? Leave your comment with your opinion, and don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other moving stories like this one.